There is a discussion group that meets immediately after this class. Leslie Kaufman, who was sitting there and then she disappeared. Maybe she'll come back. And when I asked her where it met, she said, back there somewhere. So I think you go out and take a right and you'll find the discussion group. So I thank those guys back there who make it possible for this Ordinary Life class to go to those of you who are watching online, participating with us online. I'm very grateful for that technology that makes this possible for us to do. Yep. And no matter who you are, no matter where you are on your spiritual journey, you are celebrated here. Okay. I know you've already done this morning as part of your daily spiritual practice. You have, but let's do it again. If it helps to close your eyes, you can do that. And we bring to mind that we reside in the heart of sacred mystery, and that sacred mystery seeks to find expression through how we live our lives on this planet that does not belong to us. So may grace be in our heads and in our thinking. May grace be in our eyes and in our seeing. May grace be in our ears and in our hearing. May grace be in my mouth and in my speaking. May grace be in our hearts and in our understanding. And may grace be at our ends and at our departing. And may what we do here today benefit all people everywhere. Amen. So, this is the last time I'm going to be teaching here until September. I'm going to take my summer break. It's always risky to do this because one of us might find out we can do without it. Most of the time, I will be here, and we have a great slate of people coming to speak. Michael Taylor is going to come. Erica Graham is going to come. Somebody from the Baha'i Faith is going to come. Natalie is going to come, and Natalie and I are going to dialogue about what her experience as a brown person is in our culture since she's been here, what she deals with, and that sort of thing. We'll have a chance to dialogue with her. I don't know if you know who Natalie is, but Natalie is a woman whom I first met when we went to Bolivia, to Cochabamba. She was there, and our group from the church who went there met her. Wilson and Nora Boots lived there. We visited with Natalie's parents, and sometime after that visit, Natalie came to Houston, and she lived with one of our church members for a while. She learned English, went to seminary, got ordained as a Methodist minister, and has served on this staff ever since. And she is a woman who is got a rod of steel integrity running from the top of her head to the bottom of her feet. She is an amazing person. So if you don't know her, I'll be glad for you to meet her at that time. So I use a line I heard from Dr. Jim Bankston when he would take his summer break. He would say, I need a break from preaching and you need a break from listening to me. So as I said, I'll be here much of the time. Some of the time we are hoping to spend in Mexico. My son and his wife have a house in San Miguel, and it's cooler there. So we plan to be there if that's at all possible. I hope you'll be here too. So for today's teaching, I am using a section in the Gospel according to Jesus as constructed by Stephen Mitchell that is a quite long passage. And rather than read it, I'm going to summarize it because most of you are quite familiar with aspects of it from your past. It is about a time when Jesus is on his way to someone's house. He's been asked to go there because a little girl who lives in that house has fallen ill. And so he's going there because of that. And we talked last week about how Jesus gained a reputation and thereby a following, which gave him a crowd to whom he could teach because he was a healer. So on his way to this house, a woman comes up behind Jesus and touches his clothing. And she herself was in need of healing because she had a menstrual flow that would not stop. Her condition had been going on for years, and because of this, she was deemed to be unclean. Therefore, she was shunned by her community. She tried everything, including going to other healers, but nothing had worked. So hearing about Jesus, she goes up behind him, finding anonymity in the crowd, touches his clothing, or as it's usually translated, touches the hem of his garment, and is healed. This is probably one of the best known healing stories in all of the Jesus narrative. A lot of songs have been written about it and that sort of thing. Now, there are 37 specific healing stories told in the Christian scriptures about Jesus. Mark, Matthew, and Luke also have phrases that appear in their narratives that say, and Jesus healed many people. Or Jesus healed people in the crowds. Or even in one instance, Jesus healed a crowd. So we don't know what the history is behind all of these, but there are those narratives. In none of these instances is what Jesus does referred to as a miracle in terms of what we have come to think of as miracles. And in none of these events do the people involved seem surprised that this has happened. Maybe they are surprised it has happened to them. And maybe they are surprised by gratitude. But no one responds to any of this by saying, wow, I've never seen anything like this before. The reason for that was that healers were common in the time of Jesus, and so were healing events. This is well documented. Jesus' apostles are said to have done healings, even to have raised people from the dead, as Peter did. So healing stories and expectations of healings were part of the Jewish tradition. It was only when these stories moved into the Western world and mindset that they became miracles. So in the world of Jesus, it was accepted that God could come down from heaven, have sex with a human, and that human would give birth, and the child born would be a divine being. The story of Jesus' mother having an angel come and impregnate her, and she gives birth to Jesus, is just one of many stories just like that in that time. Now, I'm confident that many of you have heard of the healing that Jesus did to a man by a pool called Bethsaida. Now, that site in Bethsaida was actually discovered by archaeologists in 1964. There was an explosion of things that happened in 1964 regarding religion and theology, and when I first wrote this teaching and I'm offering today, I went off in that direction, and I cut all that out because we don't need to spend time there. But that pool that was discovered by archaeologists is part of an Asclepion. Now, an Asclepion was named after the Greek healer Asclepius, who was a human being. Now listen to this. He was a human being who was later deified as a god. Okay? This is what many people have done to Jesus. Asclepius was said to be, after his death, the son of Apollo. And Apollo came to earth and impregnated an unnamed woman and gave birth to Asclepius. I'm guessing many of you have never been aware of that before. One of the most famous temples of Asclepius is in Epidaurus in Greece. And Sherry and I have actually been there. And at a museum in Athens, I bought a small statue of Asclepius that I keep on a shelf in my office. Now, I've got a lot of things in my office that it just amazes me when people who've come to see me for direction or counseling notice these things. I find that intriguing. So the story told about Asclepius is that he was commanded by someone in authority to restore the life to a potentate, Greek potent leader named Gaius, who had died. I don't know how you would feel if you'd been called to do that. But Asclepius was pondering what to do. And while he was pondering this, a snake came by. And I learned in my training in Jungian analysis that there are people who are afraid of snakes who've never seen one. So Asclepius did the human thing. He took a rock and killed the snake. And sat there and continued to ponder how he was going to cure this person. And while he was doing that, another snake came with a leaf in its mouth and put that leaf on the dead snake's head. And the dead snake came back to life. And so Asclepius took that herb, that leaf, and made a potion and gave it to Gaius, and he came back to life. Okay? Now think about what you think about that. Now, if you have ever wondered why the doctor's staff has 2 snakes on it, that's the reason. And this symbol, and I'm going to mispronounce this, I think, it's called a caduceus. And it's a good luck symbol in Greece. That's how you spell it, how you pronounce it, I don't know. Now, most people hear stories like that, and they say, well, that didn't happen. And this is one of the ways that people deal with miracles. I call this the impossibility option. Those who take this position say, well, things like that just don't happen. When, however, these same kind of stories are applied to Jesus, they are accepted as factually true. And this is, by the way, a requirement in fundamentalist Christianity. And so these people say, I know it sounds improbable, but it did happen once to our Jesus back there in history. And this is called the uniqueness option. This is the way people deal with miracles. And both of these options are, in my opinion, incorrect, because they're both caught up in the Western world mindset of dualism, and they can't see beyond this choice. So if you and I had been alive at the time these stories were first told, and let's just say for the sake of argument, there's some history behind it, and somebody had come and told us about the woman who touched Jesus' clothing and was healed, our response would have been, well, that's cool. We would not have heard it as anything extraordinary. And if we had told somebody, hey, did you hear this woman touch the hem of Jesus' garment and was healed? And the person said, well, that's cool. And we said, well, don't you want to come and join our group because of this? That person said, no, okay. I'm okay at the Temple of Asclepius. And besides, they have better coffee and sacred cookies. So the enlightened world has given us many wonderful things. Dualistic religion is not one of them. Dualism has perverted the teachings of and about Jesus into something that excludes and is unique, and has made both God and Jesus into things that Jesus never taught nor claimed for himself. So last week, when Holly and I were co-teaching together, I included a very brief paragraph about what I meant when I used the word trans-religious or trans-religious Christian to apply to myself. And I've gotten a lot of feedback, let's say, about that. So I just want to clarify what I mean. I said then that one reason I use that phrase is it gets a conversation going. If you tell somebody that you're Christian or that you're religious, they immediately form an opinion about you. Usually when people ask, are you religious? What they mean is, do you go to church? So if you can answer that question in a way that causes people not to slap a label on you or slam the door in your face, then you can get a conversation going. Now, as far as I know, I could be wrong about this. The phrase trans-religious is original with me. However, I constructed it from what I understand of the work of the philosopher Ken Wilber. So over the years in here, I have shared with you a number of models of psychological and spiritual growth. And there are so many of them, it would take a semester to talk through all of them just in summary form. The first one I was introduced to who did the hierarchy of needs? Is that Maslow? I think I got that one in college. But the first one that I was introduced to academically was that of Erik Erikson. He had 8 stages of development. And then there's Kohlberg, there's Piaget, there's Jim Fowler, there's Richard Rohr, there's just all these theories. So I want to give you a very quick bird's eye view of just one of these theories, because it will be helpful in understanding how we can understand miracles. So in the model that I'm going to go through very briefly, the first stage is called the intuitive projective stage. And we all experience this. This is where fantasy and reality get mixed together. And this is where most of our basic ideas about God get picked up originally. We get them from our tribe, from our parents. Some people get stuck at this stage. And if they do, their lives are usually very chaotic and antisocial. The President of the United States is stuck here. Okay? And in psychiatric terms, we unfortunately give labels to people who are stuck at this age. They're psychotic, they're sociopathic, they're antisocial, they're a bunch of other things. But there are people who get stuck at this stage of development. They never grow up. The second stage is called the mythic literal stage. And this begins when we begin to be socialized, and we take the stories of our tribe in very literal ways. We take the Christmas story, for example, if we're exposed to it, as something that was literally true. Jesus was born in a stable in Bethlehem, period. And some people stay at this level all of their lives. Now, this is very tricky because we seem to develop differently in different areas of our lives depending on our aptitude, our mental ability, and our skills. Which is why some people can have advanced degrees in some disciplines and still stay at religion stuck at this level. I'm not being critical. I'm trying to be descriptive about this. So at this level, people rely on something or someone to give them stability. That's the Bible, their church, their tribe, their parents. And they get very upset when the things they believe to be true are called into question. Okay? The third stage, the one most of us move on to as teenagers, is called the synthetic conventional stage. So by this time, we've enlarged our circle of acquaintances. We go to school with people who attend other churches or don't, with people of different skin color than ours, et cetera, et cetera. We belong to different social groups. And usually at this stage, people adopt some sort of encompassing belief system. However, it is at this stage that people have a hard time recognizing the belief system that they are in as a box. They see it as the truth. And this is the stage where most people who call themselves religious stay for the rest of their lives. But there are other stages. So the fourth stage in this particular model is called the individuative reflective stage. And this is a tough passage. So for me, this occurred in my clinical training. And I came to Houston to be trained, and the belief I had now as I look back on it, I've said this before, is very naive. I knew that I was in the system I was in because my parents were. But I was lucky I had been born into the right system. Okay? I honestly believe that. And then I began to meet people who were Jewish and Muslim. And holy Toledo, they believed the same thing about their box that I believed about my box. We couldn't both be right. And this is where, if you're open to it, you begin to talk to other people. And this is where we can get into a critical examination of our own beliefs. Now, when this happens, some people become disillusioned. They say, well, there's nothing to it. I'm out of here. Some people go elsewhere. They go become Buddhist or whatever. Some become very defensive about their box. And some deepen their roots. So the interesting thing about this is that people at stage 3 look at people at stage 4 as if they were backsliders. When in fact, people at stage 4, as you can see, have simply gone forward. So one of the sad things that can happen in this stage is that some people move into this stage and they stay there the rest of their lives. And they're angry, they're rebellious, they want nothing to do with spirituality, nothing to do with religion. And then, of course, there is stage 5. Stage 5 is called the conjunctive faith stage. And it is rare for anyone to get here before middle age. This is why the passage I've used so often in here, some of you might have memorized it. The one that I read in Jung in graduate school that said that the resolution of our difficulty did not reside in anything other than finding a spiritual solution to life's dilemma. And this usually happened past age 35. Now, this is when one stands a chance to move from dualistic to non-dual ways of approaching life. So it's here that one begins to understand the limits of logic and starts to live into the questions, live into the paradoxes, live into the fact that life is a mystery, that life itself is a sacred story, and that the stories are just that. They are just stories. Now, here in my understanding is where one becomes trans-religious, because the previous stages are not thrown away. People at stage 5 see the truths in earlier stages, but they see them in dramatically different ways. So when I was in seminary, and I had a professor who just opened a world for me when he said Jesus taught in parables. And Jesus' followers told parables about Jesus. That opened a whole new world for me. The birth stories are parables. And they made better sense to me because they liberated the story from the literal understanding of the story. Jesus being born in a stable meant that there was no room for him in the established order. It is not a factual story. It is a parable. I'll tell you about the 6th stage, but I don't think any of us need to worry about it, because most of us will never get there. We know some people who have gotten it. But people who live at this stage know that believing isn't about believing. Now, this is just one model. There are dozens. And Ken Wilber, whom you can look up on Google, has come up with what he refers to as an integral model that seeks to combine all of these psychological, spiritual, mental, emotional models into one integrated model. You might call him the Einstein of philosophy. Wilber's two main points, and I confess, there's a lot of Ken Wilber I do not understand. He's way over my head. But two of Wilber's main points is that we go through these steps sequentially. So if you're here today and think you're at stage 3 and you're going to jump over to 5, you can't do that. You got to go through the stages sequentially. His other main point, and this is where I got the trans-religious part, is that in healthy development, we transcend one level, but we include what has gone before it. I am so grateful to the benign fundamentalist raising of my youth. Grateful, not angry, not disappointed, because they taught me a community of love. They taught me about the Bible, at least at one level. I learned the Bible in that context. I have not thrown away the birth stories of Jesus. I've not said, they're just stories. They're powerful parables. And in wanting to embrace the religion I inherited, but wanting to embrace it differently than those who handed it to me, I have a great role model. His name is Jesus. Jesus remained a faithful Jew. He did not become a Baptist, which is what I was led to believe. In instances where we have Jesus quoting Scripture, he was very selective. In his inaugural sermon, where he quoted Isaiah and Amos, he left out the punitive, angry parts. So Jesus offered, and I believe offers, people a way to live. He offers people a way to life. And the phrase I'm using, the one I got from the mystic Meister Eckhart about the wayless way, is how I understand what this way to be. Sarah Grant, the Roman Catholic nun who moved to India to find the non-dual mind of the East, a truer, for her, experience and expression of the faith, she is the one who wrote, "It isn't the way because Jesus followed it. Jesus followed it because it's the way." People at earlier developmental stages see it as the way that we have to go. If you don't follow Jesus, Jesus is the way, you ain't going to make it. Wherever make it means. But that's another problem of dualism. Dualism splits on what's next rather than what's now. So one of the philosophies or principles behind all of my teaching is that the wayless way leads to such important difficulties that people should not be distracted by trivial ones. Get that? If you argue about the literal nature of the miracle, you're missing it. You're missing the point. Or to put that in a somewhat different way, there are people who find it easy to believe in the literal nature of miracles who don't find it so easy to love their neighbors or their enemies or even themselves. Some people are much more successful in believing the unbelievable than in loving the unlovable. Now, the weightless way is not defined by what one believes or who passes the test to be included. It is a way that is defined as difficult by everyone who chooses to walk it, which is another heresy that dualistic religion imposes on people by saying to them, this is easy. All you have to do is believe and you're in. Jesus was born in a manger. That is to say, Jesus was born outside the confines of traditional orthodoxy, and everyone, from shepherds to wise men, are invited in. Now, I have found in the instruction I received in the religion of my youth very powerful sources and resources for instruction and creativity. However, I see now in the various forms that poses Christianity, all the way from the prosperity gospel to Christian nationalism, where so-called Christians' beliefs are used to exclude or to deter, that not only are these expressions of Christianity not useful, they are also a violation of the teaching of Jesus. And I feel an almost missionary zeal. This is my Baptist background. To be a corrective to this, or for my teachings to be. All this is trying to explain trans-religious, right? Consequently, here in ordinary life, you don't hear what you usually hear in churches. Because I see myself and my teachings to be on the inside of the edge of the outside of the religion I have inherited. And I assume this stance because it's the only way that paradoxically I can stand in the center and be centered by it. I hope you understood that. Look, God may be beyond our understanding, but God is not complicated. At least God was not complicated for Jesus. He boiled it down into two essentials. Love God, love your neighbor. It's not complicated. And one of the things that I have found amazing and grace-filled about the various recovery meetings I've attended over the years is that people share their experiences. They don't debate them. Amazing grace. So again, somebody asked me last week what I meant when, in telling the parable I wrote about going into the cave to encounter God, I said, don't take your religion. What I mean is, don't take your religion too seriously. Another phrase from recovery groups is, take it easy. Receive it easy. Buddha told a story, at least it's attributed to Buddha, that it doesn't make a lot of sense to carry the raft that took you across the river on your back as you continue your pilgrimage. So part of my work as a spiritual teacher is to sort out as best I'm able what brings us closer in our awareness of God from the things that block that awareness. So here we have the story of the woman with the vaginal bleeding. She touched the clothing of Jesus and was healed. Now, I want to be clear about two things. The people who first heard the story, the people who first told the story, did not hear it or tell it because it was a miracle. They heard it and they told it because it was offensive. We miss that. It is about as offensive story that exists in the Bible. As I've already alluded to today, Jesus' ministry can be summed up in two headings: inclusion and forgiveness. And he does this by who he hangs out with, who he eats with, and who he touches. He touches people physically. He touches lepers. He touches the tongue of a deaf mute. None of us can imagine ourselves doing that. In another story, he touches the eyes of a blind man with a mixture of dirt and his own spit. Further, the people he touches were people who almost without exception were referred to as untouchable. So if a person in that time touched one who was considered unclean, then in the process of touching, that person became unclean. And though the woman in this story is the one who initiates the touch, which makes the story even more offensive, she is untouchable because of her vaginal bleeding, and she makes Jesus untouchable. In the book of Leviticus, it clearly is spelled out. Now, these passages are not read during school in Texas. During her period, not only was a woman considered unclean, but also were the bed on which she slept, the chair on which she sat, and anyone who touches either her or anything she touches is unclean. Now, the way you get made from unclean to clean is that you go to the priest and you pay money. Menstruating women were not allowed to enter towns, cities. They had to stay out. So, in Jesus' time, and it's true now, religion for many people is getting it right. You know? It's about drawing some sort of line in the sand. Well, you believe this and I don't believe that, so we're divided. For Jesus, faith was about that which we think is unaccepted and unacceptable being included, being embraced. So for the faithful, that is for those of us on the wayless way, it's about our willingness and ability to touch the untouchable. Now, the genius of Jesus' teaching, and I first saw this not in the Bible or in the church, but in the teachings of Carl Jung, was that this touching and being touched in the outer world will never happen unless and until it takes place in the inner world. And this gets really non-dualistic and paradoxical, so hang on. You know, when COVID hit, we used a word, and we used it so often we got sick of it. And we wanted to find another word, but there was not one to find. And that word was unprecedented. We are living in an unprecedented time. Right? We are living in an unprecedented time. I have never in my lifetime expected to see our country squander its reputation in the world, and to do so quickly. to wreck our economic stability, or to have such a blatant, dishonest president with so many sycophants and incompetents running the country. Contempt for facts and truth is fatal to a democracy. I want to be clear. A Christian nation does not lie about its past. A Christian nation does not cover up its past. I think one of the genius things about the Jewish faith, and thank goodness some of it made it into Christian scripture, is the element of self-criticism. For example, you got this wonderful story about Nathan the prophet going to David, who had committed adultery that led to murder, and confronting him to his face and saying, "You're the guy." And that resulted in a repentance. I hope that somehow we can learn to have and live a faith that heals. And as I said, doing so, being so, living so is very paradoxical. For one thing, you got to make this journey by yourself. Nobody can do it for you. Now, it's true, we do this work individually, but we don't do it by ourselves. And that's one of the problems that exists currently in American culture. These things isolate us. My first supervisor had in his office a sign that said, "In order to know yourself, you must be known by another." And right under it was the line that said, "In order to be known by another, you must know yourself." There's the paradox. There it is in two sentences. Ira Progoff, the Jungian analyst with whom I was fortunate enough to learn, he taught me the extremely importance of, in spiritual practice, writing. He would say over and over, this solitary work we cannot do alone. There's another paradox. Now, my personal experience is that the spiritual teachings that have been most valuable to me are not fixed doctrines. Rather, they are tentative. Now, what I mean by that is that my embrace of them is tentative. Because if we are on a path of growth, we experience these things in different ways at different levels along the way. Each step we take on the wayless way is new. So we're going to keep going on through this Jesus narrative. We're going to encounter other healing stories, as well as other events that have been covered over from our understanding by applying the word miracle to them. So today's section in Stephen Mitchell, which you can go home and read, has two stories about Jesus being touched by a woman who was healed and by his eventually healing a little girl. And I'm using them to talk not only about a faith that heals, but about healing religion itself. And I mean that phrase, healing religion, in two senses. We've got to heal religion. Our religion that's growing in this culture, is not well. And we have to have a religion that heals people. You know, this country right now is suffering enormously from illiteracy. I'm not meaning religious or biblical illiteracy. I mean illiteracy. We add 1 million more people every year of American citizens, not immigrants, natural-born people, to the adult population who cannot read. Some people say that statistic is conservative. People can read at an 8th grade level. They can read functionally, but otherwise they're illiterate. They don't read books. Therefore, they don't know how to do the work required in figuring out what in the world's going on in the world. And they are ripe targets of the algorithms of social media to enlist them in things that make them feel right and secure. So the mandate in Texas to include passages from the Bible in the education curriculum is teaching people how to cherry pick. Pardon me. How to cherry pick passages from Scripture and ignore what doesn't fit their political preferences. Now, I'm going to circle back on this point in a moment and in the future, but one of Jesus' central teachings is that if we have a light, we have a mandate to share it. Now, a truth of growing in this model that I said is that the more you know, the less you know. This is my experience. The circumference of what I don't know is very small. But as I travel the wayless way, I encounter more darkness, meaning more stuff I don't know. Not only out there, but in here as well. When I first started this, I said, pardon me, I don't know what's happening. I wanted to follow a new light wherever it led. It sounds so romantic, so exciting, but it hasn't been. It's been challenging because most Jesus' teachings put us in conflict with business as usual. So truth creates necessary conflicts that grow people up. So, losing my voice, I'll condense this. What is a faith that heals? The first phrase that I would use is to be amazed. Every discovery of what is plunges us into amazement. And you encounter the dark night. This is not easy. And a faith that heals involves resistance. If we live in and with compassion, we're led to stand against the powers and systems that demean and dehumanize. So here's what I found that worked for me. And if you want to know what I'm skipping, you can read it in the text that comes out Tuesday. We have to live as if. We live as if all shall be well. Too many people live life only if. The German mystic Angelus said the rose is without a why. It blossoms because it blossoms. It cares not for itself. Ask not if it is seen. The rose is untroubled by philosophical whys. It just blooms. My point is not that the rose is unlike us. My point is exactly the opposite. My point is that we should take the rose as our model. There's a huge difference between faith in Jesus and the faith of Jesus. Faith in Jesus depends on our beliefs about him. Despite all that was around him, he lived as if his life were eternal, as if his life made a difference, as if he could be useful. May we follow his example. No matter where you go this week, no matter what happens, remember this: you carry precious cargo, so watch your step and be here next week. Thank you.